The final episode of Severance Season 2 is finally here, and we got a roller coaster of emotions that delivered on all fronts. We got confirmation on our theories of what the numbers mean in MDR, one of the coolest sequences in the show, having Innie and Outie Mark finally having a direct conversation with one another. We get the reveal of what exactly lies behind that Cold Harbor door we've been wondering about for so long. Dylan's relationship throuple finally coming to a head, and we also have Milchick's first stand-up routine, as well as a glorious heaping scoop of Jame Egan getting destroyed, and much more. Hey guys, welcome back. This is Brad, and thank you for joining me for what is the last episode of Season 2, Cold Harbor. There's so much to talk about in this episode. I really love the episode overall, but I just want to say thank you if you guys have joined me at all in the latter half of Season 2. If you liked and enjoyed any of the videos or left a comment, I really appreciate it. I just wanted to say real quick that there's still a lot more to come. I'm excited to cover some other things, Severance and some other videos. So stay tuned for that. But without further ado, let's get into this amazing, momentous episode. We pick back up where we left off at the end of last episode. Mark hasn't completed Cold Harbor as we know, so Gemma's escape plan is still a possibility. During Cobell's explanation of the testing floor, black hallway, and elevator, Mark mentions to her that they know it from Irving's drawings, and they know exactly where it is. So Innie Mark is getting caught up about this plan with Gemma and how she's to be escorted out from the testing floor by Outie Mark, and then how Innie Mark will be the one guiding her to safety out of the severed floor to the exit stairwell. During this conversation, Devin puts it very bluntly to Innie Mark, mentioning how this is basically going to be the end of Lumen. Unfortunately, it's very blunt in a way where Innie Mark has the realization that this exchange is going to be ending his own life, as well as the rest of those on the severed floor. He says this is just to save one person you happen to care about. Right after this conversation, this leads us into the phenomenal sequence of both Innie and Outie Mark communicating for the first time, and I've wondered for the entire series how this would play out, and this absolutely delivered. This is easily one of, if not my favorite sequence of the entire show. I know that Mark's on a mission to get his wife back, but the way that he treats Innie Mark is just purely as a vehicle to get what he wants. He doesn't even really consider him a person. They record messages back and forth to one another using an old camcorder. Innie Mark is being lit by the warm fire as Outie Mark sits outside in the cold. A direct contrast to the color scheme that we've seen, while the red has always signified the Outie and the lumen-esque blue colors that we associate with the severed floor. Innie Mark plays the first video that was recorded for him, and at first he's elated by the fact that he finally gets to look through to the other side, which is also a similar reaction that it's reciprocated by Outie Mark. It's truly like a mindfuck moment. We've always had these scenes where the Innie is wondering, what their Outie does, what they're like, and being able to communicate, albeit directly through a camcorder, still has to be an insanely trippy moment for the Innie, but just as much for the Outie. The initial reaction to one another is pretty calm and composed, but Innie Mark shows his concern about the plan pretty much immediately, knowing that he's going to be giving up his life. So I really like this scene a lot because it shows us the different perceptions of how people view their Innies. So for example, in this scene, as I mentioned, Mark doesn't really see him as a person. He created him, but he's effectively just a part of him that he expects should basically do what he wants him to do. Whereas Dylan actually is gaining something from his Innie, which we'll get into in a little bit, but they have complete opposite viewpoints on how they view their Innie, and I think this was a perfect way to portray that. Mark brings up the talking point of reintegration to his Innie, trying to say that he can still have a life. Their memories can be coupled together and they'd effectively be one. Although Innie Mark isn't really buying it, he doesn't know if he's actually even telling the truth, but he also says that Outie Mark has lived a lot longer life. He's got a lot more memories. It's going to be a lot more him than it is Innie Mark. Innie Mark starts to lose trust and belief in Outie Mark, and the big turning point here is Mark's lack of interest in his Innie. And that goes to show when he calls Helly Heleny, which is a direct comparison to that of when Helena called Gemma Hannah. So it's pretty clear that Mark just doesn't really have any interest in learning anything about his Innie. The conversation starts to heat up and they start yelling at one another. As the camera gets closer and closer each time it cuts between the two of them, it just makes the scene feel that much more personal and uncomfortable between the two. It's at this point Cobell steps in to have a brief conversation with Innie Mark because he just can't seem to trust Outie Mark right now and anything that he's saying. It's during this conversation here with Cobell and Mark's Innie that all the theories of the numbers that are on the MDR consoles are finally proven true by her saying that those numbers represent the tempers and they're effectively the building blocks of Gemma's mind. Innie Mark is having an outie Mark moment. He's just not having any of this. He's getting ready to storm out and turn back into outie Mark. He says that the next thing that he better see is the severed floor if he ever wants to see Gemma again. Right before Mark walks out the door to turn back into outie Mark, Cobell says, "I care for you," which is just an odd piece of dialogue for me, I think. Like, we know that she's basically been stalking him for the entire series, and it makes me almost kind of want to believe that there's maybe some more backstory on these two than we're led to believe. It just seemed like a little bit of a weird thing to say to me. We could start unraveling some crazy theories and everything like that, but it just came off as odd to me in that moment. Mark walks out the door, and we have an incredible transition from the birthing cabins to him down on the severed floor. But before we pick back up with Mark on the severed floor, I kind of want to touch briefly on Jame and Helly. We get a continuation from before on his confrontation with Helly about tricking him at the gala. Helly says what we're all thinking: "God, you're fucking weird." Oddly enough, this behavior is the exact same thing that Jame hoped Helena would portray. Jame just straight up says that he doesn't love his daughter, and he mentions that he no longer sees Kier in her. As Helena grew, she obviously became more and more aware of all the manipulation and indoctrination of this cult. She's missed out on having a normal life, and she's just not had any real connection with people. So I think that's effectively what led to her getting rid of Kier in her life, so to speak. Plus, if your dad was Jame Egan, I wouldn't want anything to do with them, Lumen, Kier, any of that shit. I'd be out instantly. We also get a confirmation here where James says that he's been siring many children in hopes to find one that fits his Lumen, Kier praising mold. This goes back to the initial birthing cabin scene where Cobell is trying to get Devon through, saying that she's one of James. So it's pretty clear that he's done this on a number of different occasions, and I really wonder how many kids of Jame Egan are out there. I mean, we have the intro that shows children in the intro of the show, so this could very well be a big part of season 3, or a very important reveal that we're probably going to end up seeing. I don't want to get into the weeds of theories and stuff right here. I'm going to make another video for some of my thoughts and theories going forward for season 3, but there's definitely something here in my opinion. None of James' children have managed to be brainwashed like he'd hoped. Like, he says that none of them fit that Kier mold. So when he sees Helly stand up against him, he really sees Kier in Helly. That aggressive and confident trait that he seems to like, despite all the taming of the tempers. For whatever reason, that's associated as like the essence of Kier. Catching back up with Mark on the severed floor, we get this religious-esque painting of Mark titled The Exalted Victory of Cold Harbor. Mark is in the foreground, and everybody that Mark has come to know or be in contact with is in this painting. It also includes all the Lumen CEOs standing at the top, past and present, symbolizing them as the higher power. It really does give off that religious painting vibe, though, if you just had replaced Jesus with Mark in that scenario. Just as a quick sidebar too, I tracked down the original artist for this and saw some cool concept art that I just thought was interesting. His Instagram is on the screen if you're interested in checking it out, but I just thought it was a really cool, maybe a little bit wacky, but awesome piece of art. Mark sits down at his computer with Helly accompanying him in preparation of completing Cold Harbor, which has to be done first before they start carrying out the beginning part of their plan to save Gemma. They glance at each other and both say that they have to tell each other something. Helly mentions that Jame Egan came down to the severed floor, and Mark fills Helly in about what happened at the birthing cabins with him speaking to his outie, and then the plan that they're trying to unravel with Cobell. Helly realizes that there's going to be no good ending for them on the severed floor. She tells Mark that he'll have a chance at living still if outie Mark is telling the truth about reintegration. Mark, teary-eyed, says that he wants to live with Helly. Helly, being real with him though, looks at him and says,
"But I'm her, Mark." I'm her.
They both know that she's an Egan, and there's going to be an end to this at some point. They can't just live happily ever after. And this is kind of what Helly's convincing Mark that he should go along with the plan. This part got me really choked up, honestly. It's them effectively anticipating their inevitable death of their Innie at this point. Mark knows deep down that what Cobell said about there not being a honeymoon ending for him and Helly it's way more true than he'd like to admit. And I think he finally realizes that in this moment here with Helly. Mark is binning some of the last numbers for Cold Harbor, and Helly has a callback to the first time that they met when she was on the table. She's talking about trying to think of other places other than Delaware, and she mentions the equator as one of the places that she knows of. A little bit later during the choreography and merriment musical piece, Helly says to Mark, "See you at the equator," And we sort of get a literal version of that to play out right at the end of the episode, where Mark is caught directly in the middle between Gemma and Helly, which led us to that absolutely gut-wrenching decision where Mark had to pick just one side. Before Mark finishes binning the remaining bits of the Cold Harbor file, we delightfully get to see our boy, Dylan, inside the elevator pop up on the severed floor. Milchick sits Dylan down with an envelope of a message that his outie wrote to him on behalf of the resignation request. And not more than 2 seconds after that, Milchick hilariously sprints out of the room like a cartoon character. This caught me so off guard, and I laughed hysterically at that. We find out that he's late for his little stand-up session with Kier and the next dance session, so he ran out of there so fast. I'm happy that that resignation request didn't go through. I knew that we wouldn't be seeing the end of Dylan that easily, even though we had both his Innie and outie pissed at the Gretchen scenario and how that ended up, both for different reasons, but I knew that there was going to be more in store for Dylan. He just couldn't resign that easily. The scene is so great though, and the way that Dylan perceives his Innie, it's especially a stark comparison to that of the earlier sequence I mentioned, how Mark thinks of his Innie less of a person and more of a means to an end. So outie Dylan left him this message that was more or less put together in 3 points. Point 1, fuck you. Point 2, I get it, she's perfect. And he goes on and says, given their shared physiology, it makes sense. It tracks that they're both interested in Gretchen. Outie Dylan says that his Innie is a self-assured badass, and he likes that, actually. Point 3, he hopes that Gretchen can one day see in him what she sees in his Innie, and he doesn't think that he should resign. He likes knowing that he's there, and if he wants to, he can leave, but he thinks he should stay. Dylan is actually finding a lot of motivation in his Innie to make himself a better person on the outside. He understands his Innie has all these admirable qualities, and that if he works on himself, he can hopefully work himself into a person that has those qualities that his Innie has, who's a person better reflected as a combination of the two. Again, I just can't stop thinking about the contrast between Mark and Dylan's scenarios here with their Innies. Dylan's looking to work on himself. He's kind of taking these two parts of him and looking to put them, metaphorically speaking, together as one. Whereas Mark is making two as one literally through reintegration. Like Dylan manages to see his Innie as his own person with his own specific qualities that he can take and learn from, where Mark doesn't see his Innie as a person at all. And it was just created out of hatred and despair due to his own life scenarios, and as a result of that, Innie Mark just so happened to kind of be on the other side. While Milchick is preparing for the final numbers to hit the bin in Cold Harbor, we see Gemma getting ready for entry. Much like the other rooms we saw in the Chikai Bardo episode, there's an outfit specifically chosen for this Cold Harbor room, and it's the exact outfit that she wore on her way out before the supposed car crash occurred. Also, before we get into the breakdown of Cold Harbor and all that, I just want to mention that in my breakdown of the Gemma episode, I think it's pretty much certain, outside of it being directly confirmed, that there was no car accident. I'd be shocked if it weren't just her being abducted while she was out alone that night. So there's been just so many different theories about what might be behind that Cold Harbor door. Could it be a car crash simulation? Could it be Gemma drowning? Were there enough hints and foreshadowing for one of these devastating scenarios to play out the way that a lot of people thought that it might be? Because it was supposed to be the effective end to Gemma, which was said by Dr. Maurer and Drummond. But we find out that it's actually just the final test for Gemma's chip to be extracted, and that's the reality behind the end of Gemma. Gemma enters the Cold Harbor door, and once again, she's severed into another Innie. This is her 25th Innie, which is just completely incomprehensible. Maurer comes onto the mic and gets Gemma to enter the room, and we get that line that we've heard a few times before.
Who are you?
The camera pans out and we see an empty room aside from a crib sitting in the middle. Real quick too, I just want to mention when we saw the crib before in episode 7, on the box of the crib during that episode, we see that it has Cold Harbor written on the side of it among a bunch of other text. So it was actually there the whole time in a much more literal sense than we could have imagined. Everything is so perfectly orchestrated by Lumen, so we know that their hand has been in Mark and Gemma's life for a very long time at this point, and like they say, Lumen is always listening. So this momentous crescendo of what is Cold Harbor is more or less just the ultimate test of the barrier. She's had so many different tests up to this point with, mild physical pain, being the dentist, and the hand pain from writing all the thank you notes, to being scared shitless on a plane that has extreme turbulence. but this obviously surpasses any of those to an unfathomable degree. The question Lumen has is essentially, is something as devastating and emotional as losing a child and having a miscarriage a moment that has the capability to bypass the severance barrier? That's effectively what they've been testing this entire time with all these different innies. With that said though, it's clearly not enough because we see Gemma dismantling that same crib that Mark was smashing during that emotional breakdown. And I know that it wasn't Gemma in the initial crib scene, obviously she was there, but it's just more or less the representation of that entire memory as a whole. Before going off on what happens here, I want to get back to what happened right after the completion of Cold Harbor and kind of like what got us up to that point there. So Milchick rushes out from the room with Dylan for his little stand-up routine with the animatronic Kier, which is pretty similar to what Gwendolyn mentioned in the temporary replacement MDR team. Kier and Milchick trade a couple blows back and forth here, seemingly going off script though when Kier talks down on Milchick, much like Drummond did when he was using big words. Milchick then drops a comical line on Kier here, saying that his legacy truly is irrefutably larger than life, much like the wax statue that stands before him that's 5 inches taller than Kier actually was. I think it's pretty clear that this entire thing wasn't really like planned out though, because the Kier voice still riffs off of what's being said by Milchick, and it's voiced by the actor Mark Giller, who is Kier. And the voice could definitely be some sort of AI or something, but we've always wondered all series if the board is some like representation of former Lumen CEOs that might have some form of consciousness somehow, but that's definitely something that we don't have any answers to quite yet. So Milchick introduces another severed floor department that we haven't seen before yet. It's choreography and merriment, which in celebration of Mark completing Cold Harbor results in another second round of Defiant Jazz Milchick's dance moves, which we love that. I love that they brought the Milchick dancing thing back again because it added a layer of like hilarity and comedy to a moment that was like starting to really grow with anxiety, with Mark needing to get down onto the testing floor. During all the chaos, Mark makes his way out of MDR while Helly traps Milchick in the bathroom and also gets a helping hand from Dylan pushing the vending machine up against the door. We don't get much more from these people aside from Helly rallying the innies against the establishment with her saying,
"They give us half a life and think we won't fight for it."
Which ultimately just culminates in this epic moment as well of Dylan standing in front of C&M when Milchick finally gets out. Mark is navigating his way through the hallways of Lumen, trying to get to the testing floor, and during this part here, we get all our goat theories finally put to rest. So Drummond pushes on the wall in one of the hallways in Lumen, and it opens up this little secret room area where they do the goat sacrifices. Lorne is bringing him the next sacrifice, and Drummond asks Lorne,
"Has it verve?
It does.
Wiles?
The most of its flock.
So she's seemingly picking out this goat that embodies the Core 9 used as a sacrifice alongside the test subject, saying that it's meant to accompany a cherished woman to the grave to shepherd her to Kier, which is Gemma, obviously. So we can finally snuff out all those crazy goat theories that were like saying maybe they're using the goats to implant memories and all that stuff. I love that. It's interesting. I've always wanted to know what the goats are for, but I think, this is just another non-surprising cult-like action from Lumen, which is just offering the goat up as a sacrifice to Kier. Thankfully, right after Drummond loads his bolt gun to make the sacrifice, they're interrupted by Mark looking to get down to the testing floor. And this ends up in this fight scene between Drummond and Mark. Drummond is choking Mark damn near to death when Lorne comes out of the secret door to fuck Drummond up. And I know she's Brienne of Tarth in Game of Thrones, but she's actually taller than Drummond is in real life too, so she's a bad bitch and you don't want to fuck with her. Or her goats. So both of them are able to overcome Drummond, and in Drummond's bloodied up form, Mark uses him as a hostage to guide him down to the testing floor. And this leads us to a completely unexpected thing where Innie Mark is on his way down in the elevator with Drummond explaining how he's about to unsever, and at that exact moment, he tenses up as he unsevers into outie Mark, and he pulls the trigger on the bolt gun and kills Drummond right in the elevator. Not gonna lie though, this actually really cracked me up. I was expecting Drummond to kind of guide Mark all the way through the testing floor, so when he died like that, it caught me completely off guard. But at the same time, Drummond became like a human door stopper and actually ended up helping Mark and Gemma escape off the testing floor out of reach of Dr. Maurer. Mark has a little tip with the nurse outside of the Cold Harbor door with his unloaded gun, chasing her off, trying to find a way to get in there. Mark gains entry to the room by putting Drummond's tie on his finger to get the blood out of the tie. Mark walks in and tries to calm Gemma down. This is one of her many innies, and he's just trying to get her to calmly leave the room with him. Mauer and Jame Egan are obviously pissed, since this ruins their momentous day, and we get the most animated view of Jame Egan that we have ever seen, with him screaming. Also, I just want to mention real quick how hilarious it is that he's got this little room that's connected directly to the elevator in this like super small claustrophobic room that he does his observations in. It's like his little cuck closet. During this moment with Gemma and Mark, we get to see one of 4 different versions playing out, as I mentioned. One being the Innie Gemma and outie Mark in the Cold Harbor room. Then that's followed by outie Gemma and outie Mark meeting for the first time in a long time. Then after that, their entry back to the severed floor, which is Miss Casey and Innie Mark. And then right at the end is when we have outie Gemma looking through the doorway back into Innie Mark. I really loved all the different versions though, and the interaction with the opposite character, you know, whether they're severed or not. And it happens so fast too. We see 4 effective, completely different variations of them play out with one another. When Gemma finally steps through out of the Cold Harbor room, we have the first time in years that Gemma and Mark have been together since the night that she left and was abducted by Lumen. During this, oh man, this was such an emotional scene. There's so much weight behind this. This is something that the show has been hinging on happening for so long, and it finally happens. But in the midst of this all, they still know that they have to escape. There's all these klaxons going off, the lights are blinking, like they still have to get out of there. During their escape back up to the severed floor, Mauer ends up catching up out of his observation room, running to catch them, and says, "You'll kill them all," right before they get into the elevator going back up to the severed floor. I think this can be taken one of 2 ways, where Mauer's referencing the killing of all of Gemma's different innies that he's kind of like come to creepily fall in love with. Either that, or it could be, you know, them escaping the testing floor, which is going to ultimately result in the end of all the other innies, basically just from Lumen's secrets being leaked on the outside. But I think in this context, in this exact moment, that it's pretty safe to assume he's speaking directly about Gemma. Through all this, Innie Mark sticks to the plan all the way up until the end, where we meet at the quote-unquote equator again here in this scenario, with the klaxon alarms blaring and this chaos and hysteria of the dismantling of Cold Harbor. We find ourselves with Mark ushering Gemma through the exit door, but he doesn't follow her right away. He stands there looking back at her. Gemma's on the other side begging Mark to come through, and while he's looking back, Helly pops up in the background, and this ultimately sets the stage for the insane ending we're about to have. Right at this first moment, Mark not leaving through the door, much like a lot of other people, I'm sure they were yelling at the screen, but once Helly showed up, it was over. It was obvious that he was picking Helly, and it's pretty clear just through the conversation with himself that he has already made his mind up, more or less. With Mark talking with Helly and MDR to go through with the beginning of the plan, he just realizes that he wants to spend his life with Helly. In this moment of him looking at Gemma, or Miss Casey to him, and then looking back at Helly, he's looking at somebody that he doesn't know. And then he's looking back at the one person that he actually really cares about. He'll take a limited amount of time in the unknown, picking Helly. He's picking love instead of effectively what would just be ending his life for the betterment of his outie. And he didn't even trust outie Mark. On their way out, Helly steals a look from Gemma before her and Mark cut around the corner out of sight. And I don't think that this is like a haha, I beat you, I'm stealing your man type of look. I think she genuinely feels for her. Helly earlier in the episode said that Mark should go, that he should go with the plan so he has a chance to live. But they'll take just that small amount of unknown time that they have here while everything's going down. Also, I want to mention, because this video is coming out a couple days after I usually release the video, that some people were thinking that that might have been Helena right at the end there. And I didn't really put that much thought into it. I thought that that was pretty clearly Helly to me. And I don't think the show is really trying to mislead us. I think that when Helena was on the severed floor before, it was very obvious. But to clear up any ambiguity about this, Britt Lauer in an interview post-episode did say that that was Helly R. So that kind of snuffs that out. And we finish up with Mark and Helly running hand in hand while the song Windmills of Your Mind by Mel Torme is playing, which is just a brilliant choice for this final moment here with these two. The song's lyrics are just a perfect metaphor for the severed experience. It's just spiraling, looping thoughts, never-ending corridors, and the escape just barely being out of reach. It's so perfectly fitting and haunting for the moment that we get here that ends and wraps up season 2. As Helly and Mark run through the hallways of Lumen, We get a slow zoom in and end on a freeze frame. And honestly, I'm just happy we didn't end before Mark made that decision because I could not handle another cliffhanger like we had on season 1. Well, it's finally come to an end. That's the end of Severance season 2, and what an episode. That delivered on all marks for me, no pun intended. I feel like it satiated exactly what I was looking for in that finale, and I think that it was even better than season 1. I know that the season 1 finale was incredible in its own right, building up that story of MDR, and this one's just incredible. I'm glad that we ended up getting Dylan back. I was a little worried at first that we might not get Dylan, but he plays a little bit of a role in this finale, and his wrapping up of his experience with his resignation and the whole Gretchen scenario, that was great. Then obviously we get another Milchick dance session, which that's incredible. My man Tramel Tillman has some amazing moves, so you gotta love that. And just seeing the plan collapse and how pissed off and aggravated, Jame Egan, Mauer, Drummond dies, like it's a huge dismantling of this entire thing that they've been planning. So I felt really satisfied by it. The ending, I know a lot of people really wanted to see him walk through that door, and I did too at first. I was like yelling at the screen. I was like, "What are you doing, Mark?" It seems like the obvious choice. And what I mean by that is, where would the show go from here if Mark didn't make the decision that he made? I feel like there's a lot more curious and interesting things that happen as a result of that choice than the reversal. And with that said, Innie Mark has effectively achieved the goal that he was set to do. His goal was to save Gemma. His goal wasn't to save himself. His goal wasn't to leave Lumen with Gemma hand in hand or anything like that. He just needed to go down there and save Gemma, and he did that. When it came to the end and he was set between Helly and Gemma, he made the decision that felt right to him, which I think he made the right decision for himself. Obviously Gemma's been trapped down there and her story is horrible, and we've wanted to see like a good happy ending for Gemma for the longest time, but she still is on the outside. I know she still needs to escape out of Lumen, but I think it's kind of meant to be interpreted as she's okay on the outside, thankfully, as far as we might know. So I have a few other things I want to talk about. I don't want to create like a huge theory video at the end of this video after the breakdown. I'll save that for another video I intend to make. I just wanted to talk briefly on a couple of points here. I think I briefly mentioned the reintegration thing during the Cobell episode, but I still feel like this was being written in, then it took a little bit of a turn. I know it's kind of always been there. It's been hinted at with PD going through it and then Mark slowly going through the process. But during the initial birthing cabin scene, when Mark transitioned to his Innie, it gave me a lot of whiplash, thinking like, wow, we're really not anywhere near where we thought we were going to be. And that's fine, because had that been a bigger theme towards the end of this season, the way that things played out would have been completely different, because Mark would have been, coupled with the memories of Innie Mark, and it would have been an entirely different season finale. And I love the way that it played out, so I have no complaints there. I just think it's kind of interesting, and it's been a slow burn, and it's probably going to continue to be a slow burn into season 3, where that becomes more of a thing for Mark and his story going forward. It seemed to take a little bit of a sideline overall in the story. And then obviously we hadn't seen Ragabi. She's not as important. She's more of a vehicle of Mark completing this reintegration process. So another quick thing too is just Cobell and her involvement. It's a huge reveal that she created Severance. She created the Severance chip and the process behind it all. She's the genius behind it. You'd think that she would have had a little bit more involvement with how things went down, rather than just she was a messenger more or less for Mark here to fill him in on some of the things that were going down on the severed floor with Gemma, and what would be the most effective way for him to save Gemma. You'd think that she would have some, higher level security or something, or would have been able to be involved to a higher degree. And I'm not saying that I wish Cobell was down there kicking doors down with Mark or anything. It feels like we got this insanely big reveal, but it didn't really pay off in anything beyond that. And I realize, we have season 3 now. It's been confirmed, and, we'll likely see 4 seasons of the show, maybe even more. So there's a lot more to explore. but it felt like that reveal coming at the end of the season was meant to build up hype for an even bigger thing to happen, which we didn't quite get, but I'm not upset about it. I just thought that that was something that I was thinking about, so I figured I would mention it. But man, what an episode. It was truly a roller coaster of emotions though. Like, I laughed, Milchek running out of the door really fast to get to his little Kier stand-up routine, the random band that pops up basically out of nowhere, Drummond getting killed unexpectedly as Mark severed. Meanwhile, he's in there trying to explain to him what's going to happen, and then it just happens and he shoots him just because his body seizes up. These are all, it's funny. There are some funny moments, there are some light moments, and there were some incredibly emotional moments. Mark meeting with Gemma for the first time in years, and then the ending. Honestly, I just loved it. Like, for me, that was the most ideal episode of Severance that we could have got, and I'm just so excited to see where we go from here. There's so many questions we still have. And then we also have Irving. Obviously, he didn't really need a part in this finale, but I'm excited to see when he comes back. And there's a lot of things that are brewing right now still. And I'm hoping it only takes, about a year and a half, maybe 2 years at the most. I know that the writer's strike and COVID and all that had an effect on the delivery of the first couple of seasons, but I do want to make some other Severance videos. I want to make a video on like the cinematography of Severance because it's just so beautifully done. And there's a lot of other things I want to talk about. I want to go into maybe a couple other shows that are either currently running now or have already ended that I want to speak some about, just so I can have a little different variation in videos on this channel. I really love this show, so I appreciate you guys hanging out, chatting, leaving comments, and let me know what you think about it. It's been a really fun ride. But stay tuned for the next video that I'll have coming out sometime soon. And I appreciate you watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.